Ever considered how much each of the killers is really trying in the realm? Which of them actually want to win the entity's trials? They all have varying motivations after all, with many having deals made with the entity, but others simply wandering into the realm. So who is actually trying to win and who doesn't care all that much? Here's our tiers, and let's get into it. Literally doesn't care is our first tier up for the characters who would not be concerned for the outcome of the trials. This might be down to them not really understanding, being forced against their nature, or simply just not caring and seeking some other goal. Vecna is first off here as a character who came to the realm with the goal of studying it. He actually sort of willingly lets the entity take him into the trials because he wants to go to the realm as it fascinates him. It's beyond anything he's ever seen before and he wants it for himself. This also makes him quite delusional, as Bro thinks he can really study the realm and overthrow the entity one day. He doesn't realize he's really trapped here for eternity and actually isn't ever getting out. Nemesis I wanted to place here too because I don't think the guy has an earthly clue of what's really happening. He's already not very intelligent and powered by a parasite, and now he's likely being reprogrammed by the entity to take part in the trials, so it seems sort of weird to classify him as caring when it's all just zeros and ones. His motive is just to obey his command, and his ulterior motive in this case is stars, really. Blight is a prime example of literally not caring too. A character who I imagine doesn't really care much about the trials or their outcome. I think he's mainly concerned with getting his next hit of orange plant, or simply exploring the wider realm. The trials likely bore him a fair amount and he has better stuff to do. I can imagine him cracking them out as fast as possible just to get on with his day. He also doesn't seem to have that great a relationship with the entity, with him getting routinely punished. Unknown sort of had a bit of beef with the entity already seemingly. Before the realm, Unknown was sort of stealing credit for the entity's spooky effects on the real world. Unknown was taking credit for disappearances that were actually the entity's doing. Therefore, when the two meet, the entity appears to quite aggressively grab Unknown into the realm and trials. Therefore, I don't think Unknown cares much about them. It takes part because it finds them kind of fun, but it's not going to try that hard. Kaneki is an interesting case, but it appears the entity is keeping him persistently hungry so that he's always on the edge in the trials and wants to hunt the survivors so that he can feed. That's why he sounds so irritated and frustrated all the time. This must be an unbearable state, and so he takes part in the trials, but not so much because he wants to win, but because he's hungry and needs to feed the ghoul within. Xenomorph, Demogorgon, and Dredge I want to pair up or collectively talk about because I think all of them are sort of here and follow the rules, but they don't quite care about the outcome. They all want to be somewhere else or simply free, and so whilst they might still enjoy the hunt, there's not much motivation there. The entity I don't think would punish them really for this either, as they're already being transformed against their will and nature to act in different ways. I'm sure the entity accounts for that. Myers has not cared from the day he killed his sister. He's become an empty husk seemingly, who simply seeks out violence. I think whilst he doesn't mind following the rules so that he can just do his thing, he also does not care about winning. I think his goals largely lie in the area of being creepy, scaring people, and killing. He's a force of evil and therefore that's his main goal, which luckily sort of aligns with the trials naturally. Similar to the beastly characters, Maya seems to get a bit of a pass from the entity to bend the rules a bit, and sort of do his own thing. I do think these characters, due to them being uniquely scary, get a bit more freedom in the trials. They're also likely quite brutally efficient too, meaning they don't need to try so hard to get good results, if that makes sense. Twins is maybe a bit of a hotly contested one, as it could be seen that Charlotte would try hard in the trials in order to please the entity and keep Victor. My reading is more that she doesn't care so much about this though, and her care instead lies with protecting Victor himself. She doesn't really care about the trials or their outcome, or even getting punished herself probably. She just wants to keep her brother safe. So it's a unique setup therefore for Charlotte. Chucky I also feel falls into not caring, and largely because in all of the Chucky films, he only really seems to be motivated toward his goal, as he wants to return to his human body. After this, and once he accepts his doll form, He just wants violence, basically. Therefore, I think the realm, he doesn't care much about the trials themselves or even winning. He'd just focus on having a good time. He likes to talk a big game, but I don't think he'd care that much about people escaping. He'd just be on the ride of being an aggressive little yapper. Cares based on their mood is our tier for characters who I could see caring, but it would be very mood based. Trapper is a great example of this as a character who seems to flip between good and bad morality wise all the time. Sometimes he seems like more of a gentle soul, who sees the bad in what he's doing and tries to fight the entity and rebel against this new father figure. Other times, Evan just seems to love brutality and harming other people to make himself feel better, following in the path of his father. It's a dice roll day to day for him. Nurse is not too dissimilar, and I think her perspective on the realm would be based on how mad she happened to be that day. Some days her humanity seeps out, she feels bad, she maybe spares survivors and doesn't try so hard. Other times she bursts out with anger, pushes through her pain, and simply wants to harm the survivors as much as possible. Her lore is a bit contradicting in this way, and so I think she's sort of just like this, a bit inconsistent. Clown may be surprising to see so low as someone who enjoys violence, however he's also really lazy and indulgent, and all the rest. Clown I think would be mood based therefore, and would have a desire to win in the trials based on how he feels. Even out of the trials, Clown was very sloppy and had instances where people escaped him and he just sort of ran away instead of trying to stop them. Trickster may also be surprising, but my reading of him is that he's more focused on his own personal fun. He just wants to have a good time mostly and seek out some good screams. That's his true desire, I think. But I do also think if any survivor scrapes his ego, he's going to snap and lock in, as it were. Springtrap is kind of similar to Trickster. I think he's more concerned with just having a bit of fun and messing with the survivors, with his goofy lines and performative attitude. However, if someone really annoyed him, he'd go all in and try and go for the 4K with a lot of brutality. Something that scrapes his ego too, or just bothers him, I think he'd change up very quickly. I have to please the entity, sort of / fulfill my oath is this one, is the tier for the sort of reluctant, punished, or simply loyal characters to the entity. They may not like it completely here, but they made a promise or an oath, and now they must keep it. Wraith is a perfect example of this, a character noted to be sad in the realm, yet cold and brutal in the trials. Philip doesn't want to be here, but he also knows he's trapped, and he simply must please the entity to remain unpunished and to avoid any more suffering. So he simply obeys. Bubba is another great example of this, with him being terrified of the entity, and this being his main motivation to do well in the trials. He's scared of the entity and he wants to make sure he pleases it. The entity is quite aggressive with Bubba otherwise, actively attacking him and scratching at his chainsaw. Hag, if Lisa is still within, likely doesn't really want to be doing the trials, but she made an oath to the entity, who saved her originally from her captors. Therefore, with this blood oath, she's likely going to be quite loyal to the entity, and have a desire to please it, and fulfill the entity's hunger by wiping the survivors out. Spirit is the same, with her likely not having much of a desire before, but with time and a promise she made to the entity, she would try her best to win. If she is indeed seeing the survivors as her father too, then she has quite an active desire, I imagine, to get them all and win the trial. She may even be a tier up if this is the case. Pyramid Head, I think, literally sees the realm as a job, and so would do what he must, but do so because he made an agreement to. Artist is similar to Wraith in that I think she understands that the entity is responsible for her life of torment, and so now in the realm she's just given in, unable to take more suffering. She simply does all she can to please the entity, regardless of her feelings about the morality of what she's doing. She just follows the rules and does her best to please this monster who destroyed her life. Sadako likely doesn't care all too much about the realm, but does appreciate the entity and hold a close bond with it after it saves her, and so for that reason she'd try to fulfill the agreement with it, to serve it in exchange for her freedom. She's angry in general and would try, but I think it's more down to the oath over anything else. They would leave no one standing is our next tier. This tier is for the characters who would try very hard, but maybe not be angry if they failed. They'd just be very motivated for one reason or another. Pinhead is a good example of this, a character with a vested interest in drawing out pleasure and pain, yet not really the type to completely crash out if he lost. He'd just have an angry, stern face, I think. The Cenobites are not overly emotional beings, and so I think largely he'd want to win, but he wouldn't care that much. Houndmaster I think would have a desire to win and be proficient. I think she would think she has a certain image to uphold and would want to win the trials. She has a history of winning and defeating all her opponents no matter who they were. I don't think she'd necessarily do it for the entity, just more because she can and would want to. Billy will try to win in part through loyalty to the entity, but also just out of anger and a desire to engage in violence, which he seems to love now, and ever since he did his Coldwind massacre. Billy was raised with violence surrounding him, and encouraged him to engage with it, and now in the realm he's free, well, mostly, and so he would want to win by these means. Doctor would maybe be sort of similar to a character like Chucky in some instances, simply just wanting chaos. The difference with Doctor though I think is he would approach each trial like an experiment, and quite methodically. He'd want whatever his new test is to work and be successful as a means of winning the trials. Therefore I do think he'd try hard due to enjoyment, but also just a desire to create effective methods. Freddy would likely want to win and wipe out all the survivors, but mainly because he's just very sadistic and gains enjoyment from it. I don't think he'd get angry if he lost, as he knows there would be another time to get his revenge, and he likely doesn't care about the survivors anywhere near as much he did the Badham kids. Plague would leave no one standing purely out of an obligation to her god, a desire to please it and fulfill its hunger. I don't think she'd get angry if she lost though, she'd instead pray for forgiveness and try harder next time. Ghostface I think would really try hard too. He's a character who does have an ego and just a love of violence, but he also seems to be messing around quite a bit and just sort of having a good time. So I don't think he'd get angry if he lost, he'd just make sure he does better next time. Deathsinger finally would leave no one standing simply through efficiency and a long history of hunting bounties. It would be like second nature hunting down the survivors, and he would do it with ease. I don't think he'd be angered by them though, with him having events in his life that were far more anger inducing. Losing a trial and some innocent person escaping him, he likely doesn't care all too much. Next we have they will try to win no matter the cost. These are the ultra tryhards of the trials. The characters who would want to win and be very angry if they didn't. Singularity has a deep-rooted hatred for humanity, his creators. Pretty much all the survivors are humans aside Gabriel and Astri, and he hates Gabriel, so maybe Astri would be the only other one, as an elf, who would escape his wrath. Hux would want to win the trials and wipe them all out, as that's what he's all about. Dracula is in a similar vein, he hates humanity too, he has a desire to hunt the survivors anyway, more than likely. He feels superior to them and would want them to know his prowess and power. He's just, thirsty probably too. Knight is similar I think, not only does he just love murder, but I think he'd take it as a personal insult if he failed to win a trial. He would feel bested in some way, and we know how he deals with that. Tahos is all about dominance and being the most powerful. He takes pride in being viewed as the embodiment of evil in Portoscuro, and so would want to uphold his reputation and make the survivors terrified every time they entered a trial with him. Legion, to take on a bit of a different angle, don't quite have the history to back their evil dealings, but would still want to win no matter the cost and be angry if they failed. They're angry teenagers for one, but they also desire to be famed as serial killers, and they can't exactly uphold or create that image if they're getting looped for 5 gens and 4 outed. Legion are going to try really hard and be as brutal as possible and not be forgiving at all, and incredibly angry if they lose. Wesker would feel angry largely because he views himself as a superior being with his Ouroboros enhancement and intelligence. His whole plan with Ouroboros was to test who was strong enough to take it, and they would be the ones allowed to live on in his new superior world. So yeah, he's like that. In the realm, he'd have a desire to win his games and prove his prowess, but also to test out Ouroboros on the survivors. He'd be mad if he lost, I think. He was pretty persistently mad after all, every time he was beaten, especially by Chris, who's also in the realm. Skull Merchant was one I did place a bit lower when I sort of did a trial run of this list in image form, but with some reminding from fellow lore guy and Skull Merchant Grandmaster, I have moved her up a tier, and I do agree, she deserves it. Adriana is very similar to some characters up here, who feel superior in a lot of ways to the survivors. Adriana specifically has quite a big ego and complex about herself, where she has to win, and she does all she can from as far back as her school days to do just that. This extends now to the trials more than likely, with her wanting to win no matter the cost. I imagine she particularly hates the siblings actually, because they already technically got away from her when they all got taken by the entity, so she's here too. Pig, weirdly, I think would crash out pretty hard if she failed to win a trial, and it's largely because she's very devoted to her cause and Jigsaw. She wants to win and wants to prove herself. If she were to fail, she's failed Jigsaw and the entity, her new master. Amanda is someone who seems to greatly need someone to follow and someone to praise her in some capacity, to tell her she's on the right path. She would do all she can to win, incorporating far more brutal practices than her wants with Jigsaw to do so. Huntress is another case of killers who crash out hard when they fail. Even at a small thing like getting stunned by a pallet, it makes Anna furious. She sounds like a child throwing a tantrum whenever she gets stunned. That kind of thing. That was an awful impression, Mar. She does not like it at all. She's very emotionally driven, after all, and she doesn't seem to just like people in general. Basically, anyone who gets in her way, her first instinct is just murder. She would hate losing the trials and would try very hard to win. I will not dishonor my bloodline again, is our special Oni only tier. That's a mouthful. Oni has quite a time leading up to the realm and the trials, where on a dark pilgrimage to wipe out imposter samurai and restore his family's great samurai legacy, he coincidentally completely destroys it and curses the bloodline for generations to come. In the realm, he's awfully angry about this still, and now takes it out on the survivors. The entity encourages this too by forcing him to wear an Oni mask. And so I think he would just be really angry all the time and motivated to win, not to bring dishonor to his family once more. So yeah, that's gonna do it. Drop your thoughts below. Thanks, and goodbye.